Avec Philippe Séguin du bureau d'enquête, nous vous présentons ce soir à JE le portrait et l'histoire de cet homme que vous voyez derrière nous. D'apparence plutôt banale, mais détrompez-vous. Un homme qui était au fond une froide et redoutable machine à tuer. Le machine à tuer.
Looking back at les machines à tuer, the killing machines, in the previous video, we saw that times had changed. They were no longer the rowdy bunch. It was all about making money, and that's the reason that the biker war was initiated. But these véritables machines à tuer had committed way too many errors, which in return invited the police. And for the rest of Canada, Quebec was a stepping stone on how to carry out intersectional police work, creating cross-regional teams, coordinating intelligence. In other words, the evolution of police investigative techniques, which they inherited from the Keko days, which they had added upon. The 1978 Commission on Organized Crime, they were leading by example over here. Remember, before the BC Wars, there was still a time between 1994 to 2001 where the biker war had ravaged 363 victims, with some innocents in there. But what were these errors? As you may have heard already, in September of 1997, they assassinated 2 prison guards. And just 2 years before that, they had exploded a vehicle in Hochelaga Maisonneuve, which killed an innocent child. But they had not learned their lesson, because by September 2000, they had tried to assassinate Michel Auger, the journalist. Yes, the merry band of freedom fighters could not simply let go and allow freedom of speech. Imagine that, being a self-professing tough guy and catching feelings over words in a public forum and ruining your organization over it. That was one of the dumbest moves they could have done. This ain't Mexico, but the megalomaniac Maurice Mom Boucher had ordered that hit. Of course, he would deny it initially, and he would confess and make light of it a decade later. Yet in his narcissism, he would not recognize an error was made, but he would punish others for theirs without a second thought. Such is one indicator of a sociopath. They're willing and able to steamroll over anybody. And what's maddening about all this is one of the assassins who carried out the hit for his benefit is missing till this very day. They say ain't no honor among thieves. And so may I add that there is no honor among killers. Or very, very little of them have it. You have to understand, when the going gets tough, like those 1,089 arrests linked to the violence, they're willing to turn on each other. And sometimes, they don't even care who it is. In fact, if we go in circle, I mean look back retrospectively, they would turn their backs on Maurice Mom Boucher as well, after everything he had done for them. He's one of the biggest reasons they made so much money. In the end, the only person that he could fully trust was his loyal servant, even Wooly. His hands will be tied a few decades later, and there's nothing he can do about it. Even he can't go against the big red machine. His mom. For those who don't know, while Mom was incarcerated for all this, at the very end of his life, he was bored, and he wanted to feel the power. And so he would ask Gregory Woolley, through his daughter, if he could be of service to the cause. And we know this because Gregory would pay him tribute. But then the inevitable happened. Rumors started to circulate. He was no longer a Hells Angel. That Maurice Mom Boucher was kicked out of the group. And I'll be honest with you, when this rumor circulated, I thought it was an elaborate plot. A scheme devised to show that the Hells Angels had reformed in their ways. Whether this was true after all, I'll leave it up to you. But please consider the rest of the facts also. It's very hard to believe. So how could I be sure of this? That it wasn't a false positive? Well, the signs are obvious. He aged. What I mean is, he matured. He finally grew up a little. His fantasies were losing their color, like his hair. He understood the endgame of this dog-eat-dog world, of outlaws and criminals. They were not really following him. they were going to be following the money. And as long as he sat in that cell, he would become a nobody to them. All roads lead to Bordeaux prison. And he was mad. He was growing bitter. It was eating him inside. There seems to have been an informant inside of jail that would relay information to the police. Maurice was enraged. Wouldn't you be if you were kicked out after having served the Hells Angels, made everyone else rich, ending your life in the penitentiary, no hopes of ever coming out, and for all that you can't even keep your patch, your full status as an honorary member? By 2015, reports were coming out. It seems that he was plotting their deaths. He was seething in anger. He wanted revenge. He knew the politics of prison gangs. He knew how things worked. All those scheming bastards. If he were to come out one day, they could possibly, coincidentally, be picked off one by one. Sure, he was old. He would probably not do any of it himself. But I'm sure he would find someone who worships him to do everything he wanted. This is not surprising, as he was getting people stabbed in jail. We could also give the guy credit. He was doing the stabbing himself. And years later, we would learn that Maurice was a tyrant in jail. Any signs of disrespect he would not forgive. Could you really be surprised? He was willing to sacrifice innocents out there among us mortals. Shout out to the Hells Angels who have decency, who disagreed with him, whether they could disagree outwardly. And I'm speaking about the real one, wherever you are. And by the mid-90s, the police's story also has significance to us. They divide into 4 sections. 1, pre-Carcajou operation, which was January 94 to September of 95. The police gang itself had 80 members coming from the SQ and the RCMP, with an unlimited budget and a mandate to destroy bikers. They waged war against the Hells Angels in the Montreal area. They multiply arrests, and as often is the case, they do all this hoping that they'll make mistakes, call their partners, and say, "Hey, we're being watched. What do? We need to do this. We need to do that. Move the cake, buddy." And then they come for the kill. And that was just the beginning, because Carcajou itself was conducted between October of 1995 to January of 1996. And that was Montreal, Phase 2. Finally, we reach Phase 3. Carcajou, Montreal, and Carcajou, Québec, July of 96 to April of 1998. Oh, and Sherbrooke also. But the saga against the 1% was just beginning. After Desroches' death, they adopted the anti-gang law, Bill C-95, in 1997. And this all culminates into springtime 2001, the largest Canadian anti-biker operation. Now, I mentioned the word amplification on part 1. The definition in the Merriam-Webster dictionary is borrowed from the Latin amplification, amplificatio, act of making a greater or enlarging upon in rhetoric, from amplificare, to increase the size of. In other words, to simplify it, the act or result of enlarging or extending or expanding a statement or an idea. One of the most important things to understand in this cuckold system is to amplify your reputation. causing people to betray themselves, abandon their own, in order to follow the program dictated by a band of self-proclaimed freedom fighters living by their own rules that you must follow. And so their preoccupation from within the jail cells of Quebec. How do we pass the message to the public? How do we recruit gullibles to do what we don't want to do? It's always the same story in organized crime circles. Whether we talk about the Rizzuto family or the California penal system with La M. But let them not kid you that it's for La Raza or for the freedom. Believe common sense, my friend. The inner core or pit of the peach, or what I call the sin, is money. En 1980, aux dépens des motards, ils mettent leurs énergies au service de deux besoins qui apparaissent primés chez tous eux, toute considération, la drogue et le sexe. An Anglo-cop would have said, I had to. But his homologue would have said, ce gang n'existe que par et pour la commission de crimes lucratifs servant son propre enrichissement et celui de ses membres, le plus fréquent étant celui de trafic de stupéfiants. Let me translate this idea for you. The police believe that this gang only exists for the commission of crimes that are worth it monetarily for its own enrichment and its members, through frequently the traffic of drugs. Denis, an anonymous biker, adds, ils étaient pas millionnaires en un an, là. Fait qu'eux autres aussi, il fallait qu'ils se fassent des vols. Et eux autres aussi, il fallait qu'ils aient une criminalité autre que juste vendre de la drogue. Parce qu'à vendre de l'acide et du hash, c'est sûr qu'ils n'avaient pas de grosse organisation. Fait que c'était plus comme du monde. Ils étaient vus plus comme sales, mal habillés. C'était la grosse barbe. C'était ça, les motards avant. The bikers you hear in this exposé are anonymous. And they say money in that era was not a major attraction. But for the new generation of the sons of Duplessis, abandoned to the vices of la belle province, a fatherless generation hit with divorce rape, labor abuse, and declining moral values, they were shaping to become financially independent from daddy government. Their transformation was remarkable from their early days, pre-Hells Angels. For some of you are old enough to remember the Gitans, les Gitans. They had to borrow money at a certain point from a business owner, a loan of $10,000, and a great deal of them eventually became Hells Angels by patching over. And historically, we can confirm their wealth by the Lennoxville Purge era. After the murder of their comrades, police had seized $150,000 cash and 200 firearms. But that was not everything. During the legal procedures for the murders of the Laval chapter members, the Hells Angels attempted to buy off a member of the jury for a large $100,000 sum. And so for the verdict that the cops were seeking, they needed an unanimous jury, since they had managed to get one of them to accept a bribe of $25,000. It was found out during the process, and so they had to throw everything away. And not only that, if the Hells Angels had their way, that jury member would have received the bonus of $50,000. And so I ask you one simple question, food for thought. How many of our politicians could resist a friend like the Hells Angels? To be continued on the saga of the 1%.